Good evening. My name is Jeff McVay. I'm the city's manager of downtown transformation. I'm the project owner for this. I want to call out Lindsay Blinky. Wave your hand over there. Lindsay is our project manager, so she's with the city as well, so she's the one that's been organizing all this. So if you have questions on what comes next and things like that, make sure you get with Lindsay. But I just want to kick things off for you today. Pretty soon I'm going to hand this microphone away. You're not going to have to hear me talk again. I'm going to give it to Don and Cindy from our consultant team, Crandall Rambula. This is a really exciting project for us. I mean, I think there's so many people in this room because you've been all wondering what's going to happen with this 27 acres for the last. Well, some of you probably have been waiting for 30 years to see what happens here. Some of you have been waiting as long as you've been around. So now this is the first community planning meeting for this effort to actually design, come up with a conceptual master plans for the site, and get something that the city can use to go out and get something built on the site. To actually have a plan that's actionable for us to go out to the development community and see something happening there. That's why you're all here. That's why the maps on the table are blank. That's why Don and Cindy are going to be asking all kinds of questions and input. We need to hear what you think. Help us understand what the community sees as important. And then we are going to move forward and come back in January. You should all grab a flyer on the table. Come back in January because our team's going to take all this information back home and they're going to start drawing. They're going to come up with ideas. And they're going to come back in January and they're going to want to hear your input on those ideas so that we can continue to refine. So by the end of March or April, somewhere around there, we're down to having a final concept that we get to take to our city council and get their approval of to move forward with. So thank you, everybody, for being here. If you haven't gotten it, we have all kinds of pizza over there, all kinds of snacks, and go over and get those so we don't have to find a way to deal with those later tonight. Thank you.
And so we thank you all for coming out. How many people have been involved? Raise your hands in a previous meeting for this area. Hands up. So a little bit of Groundhog Day for you, right? The old movie, the here we go again. Planning, planning, planning. The objective of this planning effort is to have something built in 5 years. So this is not just, let's plan it again, do it again. We're going to actually get something built out of this. So what we want to do is make sure it reflects the community's values, stakeholders' values. So while you may have talked about this before in the past, feel free to contribute any ideas or concepts that you've talked about in the past and add them to it. If you've never been here, your voice is welcome as well. Our firm is Crandall Rambula, and I'll get to that in a second, but forget the Wi-Fi. We're not in the conference room. But we're going to talk about it. We're going to do some quick introductions, maybe about a 15-minute presentation, and then we're going to have discussions around the table. So each of you should have a table map with a marker. So what I want you to do is if there's a physical thing that we should be aware of around the study area, within the study area, mark it on that map or on the handout we gave you. So you should have a pen as well. If you don't, we could get one to you. And then we want, most importantly, your top 3 issues for this area. So talk with your neighbors, brainstorm about this, but we're going to pick those up, and then they're going to be available soon at this web address. And that's a little bit convoluted right now. It's www.mesaarizona.gov/downtown transformation. And there will be a link to University and Mesa Drives. And there will be some linkages to the Facebook page as well. We're recording this presentation, so if you have a neighbor or a family person who wants to see it, it will be available online as well. So, or you want to fill out another response sheet, do that as well. So that's just a little bit of housekeeping. So that discussion, we'll do that for about a half hour and then talk about next steps. And so who are we? My firm is Crandall Rambula. We're a hired consultant to the city. So we work for the city. We're independent. They have no influence on the scheme. So this isn't preconceived. This isn't a punch list item where we just come and ask you and then just do the same old thing again. So we have a lot of autonomy and independence. We don't work for a developer. So we're not representing the private sector as well. We're really representing the community and those people who are living in the region as well. So you're part of our client base as well. So we're lead consultant. We're doing the conceptual master planning and public engagement. And oops, sorry, went the wrong direction. And so what do we do? So we're a urban design planning and architecture firm. We're in Portland, Oregon. And so we work around North America and all these cities that are very similar to it. And there's lessons to be learned, but what we tell you is that this isn't going to be a cookie cutter approach. While we've learned lessons everywhere, this has got to be about your community, and we need to make sure that anything we've learned, we apply it through the lens of that. This is about Mesa and not about those places. We worked locally, so we've worked at the Gilbert's Heritage District. So if you've ever had dinner downtown on Gilbert Road, we're working with them to talk about a phase 2, and so that they're more than just a restaurant destination, but a true downtown. So that's something we just recently completed. I'm joined by a series of sub-consultants that we have on our team, and they're standing here. I'd like them to actually introduce yourself. So why don't we start with Floor Associates?
Hi, Chris Brown, Floor Associates. We're a local landscape architecture planning firm, and we're working to support somewhat of a local liaison.
Yep, and public spaces and parks and things like that. You'll look at that. And
George Valaro, Nelson Partners, principal in charge of our architecture, so we'll be helping out with the architectural guidelines.
yeah, so it's important for us, being from Portland, we need to know what you can build in the desert. So we're from a rainy place. We need their help on that. And so I've also got here, why don't you stand up, Cindy, real quickly. And this is the brain of the operation for us right here.
I'm project coordinator, so if you need any questions answered or kind of feedback throughout the process, I'm here for you.
So we've got a couple others. I don't think we have anybody from Dibble, who's the civil engineer. So if we need pipes and water and all that kind of below grade and above grade utilities, they're going to take care of that. CivTech is a traffic engineer. If we get more development, it's going to impact your roads, so they're going to help us out with that. And HR&A advisors, their market demand and feasibility assessment. So they'll look at through the lens of what a developer might want, what other people may want as well. So that's our full team. So here's a little bit of a project overview. So we're going to be inclusive. So we've had a series of meetings today with a stakeholder committee, representatives of a broad range of people. And so that 48-member committee met today. We've had a series of one-on-one discussions with stakeholders, people who may live in the neighborhood, may have a business, who may work in the area. And here we are tonight with a community workshop. And I applaud everybody for coming out on a night. You could do lots of other things, but you're here tonight. And then we also are going to work with your elected officials. What we often say, half of this work is political, 50% of it. And so we need to respond to the elected officials and their constituents of what they want for this, not only for this area, but the overall city of Mesa. So as I mentioned, we'll also have online public engagement on that website. It's going to be at the end of this presentation too, so if you miss that, we'll have it at the end. So those are those areas. And then we'll talk about the study area. So the property that we talk about is the vacant parcels at the intersection of University and Drive, and this goes down to 2nd Street, and then Pasadena is on the west side of that. So what we don't want to do is rush to judgment on this site that has been vacant from 1980 without thinking about the context. This isn't a place that needs to be planned in isolation. So we need to think about the entire downtown and adjacent neighborhoods. So we start with some of the big things that we call local or regional destinations. And as you can see, this property is generally on the edge of the downtown. So is it important for us to tie into those? We're going to ask you about that. And we also know that there's been some recent public investment in light rail. And so those are indicated here. There's 2 stations at Mesa Drive and also at Center. So those are also important things for us to think about as we move through this. So context is as important as what happens on this site. So we'll color outside the lines a little bit. So some of you may not know, but there's a lot of things boiling up in your community. So ASU's got a campus. We've heard anywhere from 500 or more students will be here. So we'll be talking to them. But you can barely see this, but there's an outline of a bunch of little green boxes, and on the right side of this is A through O is some description of those. So what you see today in downtown Mesa is not what you're going to see in 5 years, even if we don't do anything on this project. There's a lot of stuff in the pipeline or recently completed. So what are we going to do? So we've got a 6-month planning framework. This isn't a 2-year process. It's not 4 years. It is pretty quick. It's staccato, quickly get through this process. So we're in the first phase. No pencil's been laid to paper. No ideas have been made. We have no preconceptions. We're out-of-towners who really want to build off of what we've learned from existing conditions, market demand, traffic demand, and the issues and concerns that you give us tonight. So it's really important that we get your feedback. So we'll complete this project, and then we'll be back on the last week of January for a public meeting. And Lindsay, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is going to be on the 30th of January, correct? If I'm on, what is it? 29th. I always get something wrong. So the 29th, so mark your calendars right now, and then if you put your email on that list, I'm sure Lindsay will get back to you as well as on that. And so the 29th of January, we'll be back with what we're calling a range of alternatives. So we're charged to give the City Council 3 concepts. And so what we want to do is look at 3 ways of developing this site. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to do some preliminary evaluation of those and present those to you for your feedback, all right? So after that, we'll do some additional feasibility assessment in terms of the economics, how do you build it, technical assessment in terms of what the impacts are, and probably make a recommendation based on your input. And so that will go to council, and they will make a decision for a preferred scheme to carry forward in another planning phase. So that will be done somewhere at the end of March. So this is a 3-step phase, 1, 2, 3, with some sort of recommendation for next steps happening in March. All right, so we're not starting from scratch, despite some of the things I've said. We know there's been over 5,000 comments about this. So the city has identified 6 guiding principles to guide this planning process. And what we call this is a touchstone. So when we come back with schemes, 3 schemes, you need to really have a critical eye and ask yourself, are these 3 concepts meeting these guiding principles? And the first one is vibrant and active. Vibrant and active multi-use area that providing significant market rate residential component. We know there's a lot of affordable areas around the neighborhood, and that might be a part of this project, but there's a market rate component as part of this, whether it's housing or office or retail. We want to make sure that we're drawing investment to expand the tax rolls. The second one is we want this project to be a good neighbor. This project area is surrounded by historic neighborhoods. There are uses here that have been here for a long time, and it needs to be sensitive to the physical, visual transitions to those districts and neighborhoods. So that's the second one. We want to be a good neighbor. The third one, it needs to be a varied district. We don't want a monoculture of one use. We don't want this to be an apartment complex. We don't want this to be a power center for retail. It's got to have a variety in what we call a fine-grained types of building form and uses, and it needs to be of high quality. It needs to be here 100 years from now, not 20 years. Then it needs to strengthen downtown. So whatever we do here, we don't want to cannibalize the good things that you already have in your downtown. So if you've got a going concern of a restaurant, we don't want this to develop at your cost. So we want to strengthen those uses that are already there today as part of this process. And we want this to be publicly accessible. We've heard the history of this site of really excluding people to the north, to the south, people of color, people of different ages. We know there are barriers as well in terms of traffic and other things like that that I want to talk about. But we need to figure out not only about what this happens in the site, but how do you get there? Not only driving, but walking and cycling, maybe taking a scooter even, and maybe taking a bus. So all those sorts of things we want to talk about. And then finally, this needs to be complementary. So when we think about this, there needs to be more than just development here, but this has got to improve the livability of your community. Are there assets and other things like this that are missing in the community that we should be considering for this area? So those are the 6. Again, these are the touchstone that we want to come back again and again. This isn't carved in stone. So if we need a 7th, we need to adjust this language, we can do that through this process. But this is the basis that we need to respond to. So let's talk about some quick background information. So we've done an initial assessment of market and demographics. And this is really only to set the stage. We'll be doing more definitive programmatic layouts on this, but this kind of gives us a sense for us, especially coming into town, to just affirm and ask you that, is this really what's going on within your community? So we talked about Mesa in terms of your competing, if you will, or similar communities within the valley. So there's Gilbert, Scottsdale, Tempe, and Phoenix. And so when we think about in population, since 2010 through 2016, Mesa's seen a decrease in population of 10%. Now compare that with Gilbert, Scottsdale, and Tempe. Those places are growing. You're contracting. So that's an issue. That may be a positive in your mind, it may be a negative, but this is information that if we want to grow this area, we've got to change the condition for people who want to live here. So, and then we think about some key economic indicators. What's happening post-recession? While other areas have experienced resurgence, Mesa has not. So there's some key indicators that we look at. And one of them is household income. People are poorer, 14%. Home values have gone down. And the cost burden of households, those people who are spending more than 30% of their income on housing, has increased 59%. So these are not good trends. So what can we do to affect this so this changes, so that you share the wealth of our economic expansion in the valley? So the good news, things are changing positively. Some of those green projects that we talked about before. And so those in the room probably are largely aware that there's going to be a new ASU campus downtown, considerable investment that will draw some good things with it. Light rail has also been proven to be a benefit for the region as well. And so here's an example of how light rail has made a difference, for example, in Tempe. You see the top line, the dark blue? Light rail opened in 2008 in Tempe. And from that point, there was an uptick in housing in multifamily units, as you see that line going up. Here in Mesa, we didn't get light rail until 2015. So while Tempe was seeing the benefits of light rail, we were mired in no sort of multifamily expansion. So our anticipation is, and we're seeing it already with some of the projects we've identified, we're getting more housing, in particular along the corridor and the projects that are occurring. So there's a good side and bad side of getting housing in your area. So if we take a look at rental housing by unit price, so where is the affordable housing and where is the market rate or more expensive housing? So if we look at the left side of this, where you see the dark blue line, that is the amount of housing by cost. So you see on the left side, housing less than $600, $600 to $799. In 2010, there was actually more of that housing than there is today. That's decreased by 1,560 units. On the other hand, when we think about this corridor, the housing that is more expensive, we've seen a drastic increase in that. So Again, this is information. This may be a good thing or bad thing, but this is something that we're aware of as we start seeing development in this area. How can we deal with affordability, market rate housing, and how does this area fit into that overall picture? So there's just background information for you. So this gives you a sense where the housing market is today compared to 2010. That was real quick market stuff. So we'll have more of this when we come back in January, talk about specific land uses and markets for those. The second piece of this is transportation. So we can't only think about land use, but we want to think about how we integrate transportation in this. So we start with those trip generators, those regional local destinations and the major roadways, and think about how we might want to link with these within the overall context. So the first thing we've done is looked at some of the real recent numbers that that you have traffic trips today. And so one of the good indicators is what we call average daily trips. So how many cars drive by on the road, either direction, and really test to see what this means. So if you see University Drive has 24,100 cars, Mesa has 19,000 cars, less on Center. And you can infer this in your mind if you walk or drive on these streets. You generally understand this. And first is 3,700. We've got a number down for Maine as well, but we want to focus in this core area. So that's all good information, but what does it mean? So when we think about downtowns, we look for what we call a downtown traffic sweet spot. So if we have too little traffic, you have a backwater. So if you've got a business that relies on downtown drive-by exposure, let's say I've got a grocery store. You don't want to be buried out back and behind because you got like a 5-mile radius that you need to serve. So a little bit of traffic is a good thing. So you don't want it too low. On the other hand, if it gets too high, like over 20,000, and you want to have an outdoor cafe, or you want to cross the street, it becomes what we call a pedestrian hostile environment. You can't hear somebody talking, you got air quality issues. So what we're looking for is anywhere from 5,000 to 20,000, with the sweet spot being 8 to 15,000. So in a sense, we might actually want to induce some traffic through here if we want to have certain businesses. If you don't want to have those, maybe being a backwater is okay. But if you want to have certain types of uses, we need a little bit of traffic through here. So looking at that lens, how does this line up? So University is busy. 24,000 trips above that 20,000 threshold. Mesa Drive is just below it. It's on that teetering on the edge. So can we transfer some of those trips to walking and biking to keep it from going over the top? And then Center Drive is a little further away, a lot less traffic, it's pretty pedestrian friendly, but the businesses still will thrive because it's meeting that sweet spot almost. It's right in that range, okay? Oops, wrong way. So we're not only concerned about car driving, but we also want to think about other modes. So we start with transit. And so there are two things that you already have today, and this is fabulous. You've got light rail, 3 stations within the downtown, and if you look at the 2,300 boardings at Mesa Drive, that's the highest in the corridor. And that's partly because you've got a park and ride. So a lot of people out in Apache Junction or others who want to get on the transit system are driving here and getting on the train. That's going to change when the light rail is extended out into Gilbert. Nevertheless, those are pretty good numbers today. And so you see 430 and 1100. So that's could be better. It's a little anemic, but we'd like to see those numbers go up and more people riding transit rather than driving. And so the other thing that we look at are buses. So not everybody's going to take light rail. You may have a job somewhere else, your home is. So we're interested in boardings for the 30 line and the 120, and you see those numbers there. So stops can move on those. So as we go through this, are the stops in the right location and should they be moved? So one of the key things to look at here is, you see that dashed line around the stations? That's a 5-minute walking radius. So we work for transit agencies around North America as well. And what we've found is that 80% of the people who take light rail don't walk more than 5 minutes. So I think you're lucky here because it's flat and you've got a desert environment. So other than the heat of the summer, people are going to walk a little further. But that being said, this property is a little bit outside that walking distance. And so what are the ways that we can accelerate, we say, pedestrians to get to this site? And typically that comes with improvements to other modes. So we look for a 5-minute walk and a 5-minute bike. So people will bike a mile in 5 minutes, they'll walk in 5 minutes. So you see the green lines, that's where, the double green lines, that's where you have existing stripe lines. There's the grid bike racks that you see around as well. You see those identified. And there are some bike routes identified as well. So is this robust enough? I don't know. Let us know what you think about that. Should we be adding other types of trails or what we call protected lanes rather than just simply a stripe lane? So we'll talk about bike infrastructure as we move as well into the planning process. So that's the presentation. I can come back to any of these. So what we want to do right now is take some time to answer or clarify a question or two. Cindy, do you have the other microphone if we need to hear it for everybody? But what we want to do is then take about 20 to 25 minutes to have discussions around the table. And then I'll ask a volunteer from each table to stand up and say, here's what our group talked about. And you can hear what other people's thought processes have been. And then we'll talk a little about next steps after that. So finished with the talking head up here. And it's really, now it's your time to contribute and talk about this property. Any parting questions, not comments yet? You can do that afterwards, but any clarification questions? Okay, so let's turn the lights back on, and if you would just sit down and talk to, yeah, quickly.
When you were doing your presentation, you shared that the active part of residential, so are you planning on creating residential in that area, or is that something?
So the question is, are we planning on putting residential in the area? That's one option. I would probably say it's a likely option because it's a strong market. At some point, you can provide comment on that. So it will have a ballot, and you can weigh in on it. So I would call it a ballot, not necessarily a true ballot. Okay. So we will weigh those and summarize what people say in the next meeting. So it's a bit of a fun. All right. So everybody, one quick question, clarification. That's at the next meeting. We're getting to concepts. So write these comments down, talk to you, and we'll take those and summarize those for you. Okay, so take about 20 minutes. And we've got right now about at 7 o'clock, a little bit of 7 o'clock, we're going to ask you to talk about each of those issues. They're all valid issues. Thank you.